Are you ready?
Let's go.
Now circling in the neutral zone.
Here's the pitch on the way. 36 yards for the win.
This.
Here comes a big chance. The shot.
Is
this the dagger?
The neutral zone.
Home run. Good.
This is as good as it gets.
Now, here's your host, two-time Paralympian, Brock Richardson.
What's going on? It's time for another edition of The Neutral Zone. I am indeed your host, Brock Richardson. Coming up on today's show, recently Josh and I spoke with Tiffany Gaudette, who has recently been named to the Canadian Boccia coaching staff, and she's going to talk about her journey and how she got there and the future and what it holds for the organization. Plus, we're going to talk about this idea of rest and relaxation in sports and how it's maybe more imperative in parasports. Josh and I will discuss that in a little bit. I'm joined by the aforementioned Josh Watson and myself, Brock Richardson. Here comes your headlines.
Neutral Zone headlines.
Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred recently removed Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson, along with 15 other deceased Major League Baseball players, from the permanently ineligible list. Manfred ruled that Major League Baseball's punishment of banned individuals ends upon their deaths. Pete Rose recently passed away in October after an illness. This reinstatement means that theoretically, any of these players could now be considered for election into the Baseball Hall of Fame, although many pundits believe that Rose and Jackson are the only two on the list who may earn that consideration.
Astana, Kazakhstan to host World Championships Pool B for the Parasports World and Para Ice Hockey in Italy. In September. The teams that will participate is Italy, Japan, Sweden, France, and Finland. And of course, Kazakhstan, as well as the host nation, will also participate in that. The Pool A will happen from September 6th to 11th in Kazakhstan. We wish everybody good luck, and it's always good to see parasports take front and center in different sports.
Four-time Olympic medalist Adam Van Koeverden has been named the Minister of Sport in Prime Minister Mark Carney's new cabinet. Van Koeverden, as a multi-medalist in the Olympics, is acutely aware of the needs of athletes here in Canada, and as such, I believe will make a wonderful Minister of Sport. We congratulate Mr. Van Koeverden on his appointment.
Those are your headlines. If you want to get a hold of us on social, here's how you can do that.
And welcome back to the Neutral Zone broadcast booth.
Play ball!
We're set to get this ball game underway. The first pitch is brought to you by Brock Richardson's X account at Neutral Zone BR.
Strike!
Pitch and a strike. Hey, gang, why not strike up a chat with Claire Buchanan from the Neutral Zone? Find her on X at Neutral Zone CB. There's a swing of the chopper out to second base, right at Claire as she picks up the ball, throws it over to the first base for a routine play.
Out!
And fans, there's nothing routine about connecting with Cam and Josh from the Neutral Zone at Neutral Zone Cam J and at J Watson 200. Now that's a winning combination.
We are pleased and excited to be joined by Tiffany Gaudette, who has been named to the Canadian Boccia coaching staff, and she is here to tell us about her journey and to talk to us about what is next in her career. Tiffany, welcome to the program, and nice to have you back.
Thanks for having me again. I enjoyed last time and look forward to this time as well.
Can we start by talking a little bit about how or when it became sort of real to you that you were going to be named part of the coaching staff?
I would say probably about a month and a half ago is when it started to be put in my ear that I was being invited in. I went to a training camp in Montreal for the BC1, BC2 teams and got to participate in that. And then it became even more real there. But I'd say that defining moment when it felt like absolute and 100% was when I had that contract and signed it.
There has been this big movement towards equality in sports in general with women, but in particular with boccia. What does that mean for you and the sport in general that women are becoming more and more at the forefront?
I think it's a great thing for the team. There's certainly things that women can bring to a team, as in relating to the women athlete that are on the team, and being able to understand what it's like to be a woman, what health concerns come with being a woman, and just as an athlete myself, I think that I bring that, as well as being a woman athlete and having to be in the competitive world. And I just think it's all around really great for the sport in general, because visibilities is very important. And the more women coaches that we see in sport, hopefully the more women that we can get into the sport.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what your specific role on the coaching staff will be?
My specific role is assistant coach, and I'll be mainly working with Ontario athletes on the Aspire team, and being able to dabble a little bit in working with the national team athletes as well as I work up through the development pathways. It's a really great opportunity, and I'm really excited to be able to continue my work with the Ontario athletes, moving up from being one of their provincial coaches now to being able to work with them at a national level.
As a coach, what do you believe your strengths will be for this position?
I think some of the strengths that I have is being a competitive athlete myself. Not quite at the same level. I've only been to one international competition, but I know what it's like to be under pressure to try to meet standards or different qualifications, and just the pressure that the competition can bring, especially when you have funding and other things involved, and dealing with your personal life and trying to balance it out. As well, I think I have a really big transference from my career, which was a child and youth worker. I worked in mental health. Mental health has been a really integrated part of my life. And as well, I practice mindfulness, and I'm very organized and detail oriented. And one of my favorite parts of coaching is being able to do skills and drills. And I think that'll be really great at that level.
Now, obviously, as you were mentioning, there are different responsibilities and things you do as a coach, teaching and guiding, but also there's always a learning component to it. So I'm wondering, what do you hope that you're going to learn in this role that you may not otherwise learn outside of the position?
Boccia community in Ontario is this probably the second largest in Canada, but it is quite still small. Within the province and the other coaches, I'm one of the more experienced years wise. So I think being able to move up to that next level is going to give me a really big understanding of what it's like to be an international boccia player. Because when you have like the smaller pools, or not smaller pools, sorry, I guess so, yes, the smaller pool of athletes in Ontario, and seeing some of the same athletes time and time again, you don't always pick up on the different strategies and things that it takes to compete at an international level, especially when it comes to, I find, the ramp users, and just learning different conditions about their balls, and how that affects them internationally. And I guess that affects as well throwers. You probably know that, Brock. So it just brings a lot of learning that you don't have here in Canada when you go into different environments.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a different environment from provincial to national to international, because there are so many different little quirks. And I mean, we could spend a whole conversation in talking about, classification differences, things like that between international events and here in Canada. And it's the reality of disability sports. There's just so much open-ended interpretation to classification that ultimately, as much as you try to be on the same page, you could ask 100 different classifiers their opinion on something, and ultimately you could get 100 different responses. So it is tough, but I think for me, Tiffany, and I'll let you respond to my comment. I think it's more of a, when you have consistency between Team Ontario and then the national team, you do get some really good carryover between the athletes because there's already that existing rapport. So I think this is a good thing.
I think it's a really good thing too, and it's good to have somebody working in Ontario with the athletes so that they're not always having to travel to INS and that, and to have that bridge to be able to work with the other national coaches and keep it at home.
There is nothing better than being at home and training. And yes, sometimes getting together as a team is important, but there is just that extra level, especially in boccia, that requires a lot out of the athletes physically, mentally, and emotionally to travel outside of the province. So the fact that you can sort of bring that national coach to the athletes in their own sort of home and their own province is helpful. You and the team were recently in Montreal. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure. We had 6 athletes there, and our main goal was team cohesion and just looking at different dynamics of the team. So switching up who was playing on each team, and getting the team, doing team building exercises and communicating so that when they travel together, they'll be able to work better together because they are spread out across Canada. So you don't always get much time to work with your team. So it was a really great time for all of us to come together and just build as coaches and team together.
I'm just curious. You've mentioned a couple of times about team having to travel or the athletes having to travel. Do you anticipate that there's going to be more of that now that you're in this role, or less?
I think for myself, through Ontario, just going to different athletes and probably travel back and forth to INS as needed. I don't think it will add more to the team. It seems like they do still travel a lot and they have a busy schedule, and I think that will continue. And we'll see what this year brings and the next 4 through this quadrennial.
What's next for the group as far as what's on the schedule, and can you shed some light on that?
Next for the schedule is a few of our athletes will go to Beijing for a competition there. And those that are not traveling to Beijing will probably be attending Boccia Blast here in Mississauga, Ontario. And they're all getting set up for that after being at Défi Sportif this past weekend.
Yeah, the schedule really doesn't ever sort of slow down in boccia, because it's one of those unique sports where, yes, we fill into the summer games as for the Paralympic cycle, but it really sort of runs all year round. You do your international tournaments from April to November, and then all of a sudden the provincial situation starts knocking, and even the provincial championships are in the summer. So boccia is kind of that unique window where it's there might be an off season from provincial towards international, but there really isn't an off season because of the divide, and you have to fit so much into such little time. So it's a busy schedule, but I know that you'll enjoy your role, and we will be together for Boccia Blast, I'm sure, because I'm coming down and I'm going to be doing the streaming and public address announcing. So be a busy weekend, and that's my opportunity to see everybody and just kind of go, I'm here and then I'm leaving, because I don't want to train the same level that I used to. So that's my reality now.
That's great. The one thing that I've liked with Team Canada, even though the schedule can be quite busy, and that the one thing that the coaches that I'm working with really stress is the need for rest in between competitions. And when there is downtime, to be able to take that rest, to be able to do things other than just a sport, so that you're able to keep up with your own personal life and the relationships within that and with your mental health so that you don't burn out. So that is like really great to be in that sort of environment where they care so much about the athlete's mental health and the coach's mental health so that we can all work together better as a team and helping the athletes succeed.
I'm going to sort of flip the script for a couple of minutes here, because this whole emphasis on mental health and rest, although it was important back when I played, about 10 years ago now, it wasn't so much a focus point. And Josh, I don't know about you, but now it seems like it's more of a focus because of what we know about the body and about the mental frame. And I know you've competed in sports for a long time. So can you talk about the difference that you're sort of hearing and seeing between when you played at a higher level to now, and the focus on mental health and rest and recovery and all that?
Sorry, you want me to comment on that, Brock?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's definitely been brought to the forefront. I think all of the talk about injuries, in particular concussions and things of that nature, we've learned a lot more about our bodies and our minds and what we need to do in order to maintain that. And I mean, I know we all enjoy being busy and we all enjoy doing our sports because that's really the reason you do it, is that you love it. But there does come a point where you do need a break. And I think sometimes, particularly when you're at a higher level, you do end up kind of pushing yourself, and you can push yourself past failure, so to speak. So it's really encouraging to me to hear that is becoming more of a focus. And having been a teammate of yours, Tiffany, for a while, I know that all of that has been something that you've really known about and even taught me about it at certain times. So I really hope that continues.
Yeah, one thing that I really like to stress, like to my athletes, right from a regional level all the way up, is that your health is number one, your mental health, your physical health, and as well, school and some of your personal life is important as well. And in order for you to have that balance and be able to juggle everything, you do need that rest and recovery just for your body, and just being cognizant that different disabilities take different time to recover as well. So, I may need 4 days, 5 days after a comp to sort of rest and get my body back to optimal. And some people may be able to bounce back after 1 day. So it really is different, especially when there's international travel involved.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I was in Boccia, it was quite a bit to recover, just from, the stamina that traveling alone requires. And when you have scoliosis in your back and you're sitting on those lovely airplane seats that are oh so comfortable, and it's just like, oh good Lord, do I have to do this again? But it does take a long time to recover. So for me, and I want to put out there, just because I know a lot of people from Boccia Canada in one way or another listen to this program, I'm not suggesting that it was not taken seriously in my time. What I'm suggesting is it's enhanced today because of the things we know and the things we understand now about rest and recovery, mentally, physically, emotionally, and all those things. So for me, this is a good thing, and it's a good step to understand that the recovery is needed. And I think sometimes, Tiffany, the reaction to people is, oh, because when it's a high-paced sport like wheelchair basketball, of course you need rest and recovery because you're physically moving your body at a high rate of speed versus boccia when you're not necessarily. But that mental toll that the athletes are going through is not necessarily more, but it's as much as the physical activity that's required in other sports.
I very much agree. And, when you're going at such a fast pace, like I know myself, through my athletics career, I look back and there's certain times that I pushed aside like my own physical health and ended up where I'd end up with having to take a month or two off because, I would end up in hospital or having to deal with infections and different things. And I just don't want to see any of my athletes experience the same thing. And then the mental component to that is when you're off for training for a month or two, that can be very difficult when your life is that sport. So it's really important for all of us coaches and athletes to ensure that we have a life outside the sport, just in case things like that happen. And I've had that happen many times throughout my career.
That's that lived experience that really is helpful when you understand what it's like to go through it as an athlete. And that's something that you just can't physically teach. It's something that you have to experience in order to understand what the athletes are going through. Tiffany, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. We greatly appreciate it. And Josh, thanks for staying on your toes during this interview as I threw the ball at you unexpectedly, because I never do that kind of thing during these interviews. So
thank you both. It's always a pleasure.
That was Tiffany Gaudette, who recently was named to the Boccia coaching staff. I flip between Boccia and Boccia all the time because when I played it was Boccia and now it's Boccia. So that's why you hear me flip sometimes. Tiff, thanks so much. We greatly appreciate it. I always find it interesting as the producer of this program that sometimes when I put headlines out there, it makes me think, we could pull on a few of those threads. And there's two of them that I wish to kind of pull on a little bit. Let's start with the Adam Van Koeverden appointment in the Mark Carney cabinet. I often like when you actually appoint someone who, quite frankly, knows and understands sports. Arguably, this is a person who is well recognized in Canada, been a multi-medalist, understanding. There's been other people that have held that role. Carla Qualtra, who was a para-swimmer, in fact. And so, Josh, really the reality in all this is you have to have ministers who, quite frankly, know what they're doing. And this appointment speaks that way to me when we think of Adam Van Koeverden.
Yeah, absolutely. The term that gets bandied around a lot lately is lived experience. And I think as a multi-time medalist, you do have that in Adam. He understands the workings of trying to train while trying to also manage a family and a career and all of those things. And so as someone who's been there and done that, he is, I think, uniquely qualified to be the Minister of Sport in the same way that Carla Qualtrough, as a person with a disability, was uniquely qualified to handle her portfolio as disability minister back in her time. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think you have to have people who fit in their roles in particular ways. And I'm not saying that, other cabinet ministers don't fit in their roles. We here at the Neutral Zone talk sports, and so that's where we're going to, have this conversation. I just think that this is a really good appointment, and it follows up with the Carla Qualtrough appointment from years back, putting people in positions that they're going to succeed. And Ms. Qualtrough was also known very well in the parasports community, which lends the idea of course, she'd be a good fit. And the reason is pretty simple. So congratulations to Mr. Van Koeverden, and we wish him nothing but the best in his role, and everybody else in the cabinet. And we'll see what the government can do over the next 4 years. Some might say we might be back at the polls sooner than that, but we'll see how the world of politics comes to be, and if everybody can start to play nice in the House of Commons, which has not been something that we've been able to see over the past little while. So we'll see how things go. the king is coming for the throne speech on the 27th of May, which is kind of cool, and I like that as well. So interesting stuff happening in the world of politics that you can keep your eye on. Another interesting piece that Josh, you did in your headline was the fact that Pete Rose and Joe Jackson, along with 15 other deceased Major League Baseball players, have been reinstated after a lifetime ban. And I'll start here because it wasn't my headline, but it goes back to the point about Cameron, when we talked to Cameron Jenkins, our co-host, of course, when he talked about this idea that, you know, when you receive a lifetime ban, it should be for a lifetime. And I think Rob Manfred is siding in that way, in that the lifetime has sadly concluded, and so now we're seeing them reinstated. Your thoughts?
I think it makes sense. I certainly understand that when the lifetime ends, then a lifetime ban presumably can end as well. I also not happen to believe, but I also do believe that it's also a sign of the times. If we remember these two gentlemen in particular, Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose, both were involved in gambling in one way or another. So Pete Rose was banned from baseball back in 1989 for betting on games while he was a manager of the Cincinnati Reds. It's reported that he never bet on his own team, but he did bet on baseball while he was in baseball. And so that is what earned him his lifetime ban. Shoeless Joe Jackson was a player for the Chicago White Sox back in the early 1900s, 1919, 1920. And he was a member of a ring of about 8 players that got involved with a gambling ring and actually were paid, I think it was $5,000 if I remember correctly, to actually throw the World Series. And so in one way or another, they're both received their bans because of their ties to gambling. And now we see gambling is prevalent. It's everywhere. It's in hockey, it's in baseball, it's in soccer, it's everywhere. So I do wonder if that had a part to play in it as well. But one way or another, the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, should be based on your play on the field. It shouldn't necessarily be what kind of a person you are, if that makes any sense. We have examples like Ty Cobb, who was not a very nice person, but had incredible baseball stats for his time, and he is in the Hall of Fame. So then why should Pete Rose or Shoeless Joe Jackson not be there?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the times were different in regards to betting, and it was kind of more taboo than it is today. And ultimately, when you receive a lifetime ban, it's very difficult to get that lifetime ban removed, even though they tried multiple times with Pete Rose, or Pete Rose tried multiple times to be removed. But I think considering the time that, particularly Pete Rose was involved in, you didn't see as many of those Bet Rivers commercials that you do now. Like, it's all over the place, as you mentioned, and I think that that's just the reality of where we are. And ultimately, when you receive a lifetime ban, that just means ultimately you're banned for life, and when the life comes to an end, that relates it to be removed. And I'll go back to Cameron's earlier point from a number of months ago when we had this discussion about, should Pete Rose be removed, and his answer was no, because it's a lifetime ban. And I thought to myself initially, yeah, that's a little harsh. But I think now, reading the way that baseball is viewing it, I think Cameron nailed it, right on the head, in that it's a lifetime ban, and that's the consequence in which you have to face. And unfortunately, because the lifetime ban the life has now been gone and he's deceased, therefore we can move forward. Now becomes the next question, before we move on to talk about the Tiffany interview that you would have just heard as well. Do you put him in the Hall of Fame now because he served his lifetime ban?
I think so. I think his success and his statistics overall will result in him being selected. I did read somewhere that the Veterans Committee, as it's known, will not be voting on players to be elected now until 2027. So there is going to be a bit of a wait. But I think when you put his numbers up against others, I think he deserves to be there. Again, if we're falling on the side of it should be about your play on the field and not your moral compass, if you will.
And ultimately, I look at this and say, and I know I can hear Cameron listening to us talk about this on the pod, and he's going to be rolling his eyes at me because I was very, hard in the sand when we talked about it originally. I think ultimately you look at this and you say, you've done the crime, you've served the time, and so now we have to move on in the ways that we do. And if we're looking at this purely for his success on the field and assuming that everybody agrees that he's done the time for the crime, then let's move on and put him in there. Is it sad that he won't be able to relish in that moment? Obviously. But I think that comes with the consequences of the decisions he ultimately made. And Major League Baseball ultimately said, no, you have a lifetime ban, and that's where we're going to sit on this. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes in a few years when the next ballot goes in, and be very, very interesting to see what falls out on Major League Baseball, and also who gets in beyond this. When I look at, Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, do you start looking in that window now and saying, well, maybe we soften it here? I don't know, because they haven't received a lifetime ban. They're just getting snubbed.
They've been socially banned.
Yeah, exactly. So the argument cannot be placed that, well, they've received a lifetime ban and ultimately their life is not over. Well, they haven't received that, and they're just receiving the, as you put it nicely, the social ban. And I think that's important as well. So we'll see. This is all going to open another whole can of worms that I don't really know how it's going to play out, but I'm fascinated to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be something, that's for sure. It's going to fuel many a barroom debate.
Yes, and we will have said barroom debate at this podcast if, God willing, we're still doing it in 2027 and beyond. That's the hope. But you never do know. What I do know now is, Josh, you and I had a conversation with Tiff, as she's referred to in the parasports community, Tiffany Gaudette. We had a conversation with her recently. I'm curious on your thoughts on the interview, and then we'll delve into a few of the pieces that I'm going to pull on here in regards to that.
Yeah, I enjoy when we get to have Tiffany on the podcast. I think she's very well spoken, and she's a really, really passionate advocate for both the sport of boccia and parasport in general. So I really value her input and her insight into things. Of course, we brought her on to discuss her new role as a member of the Team Canada coaching staff for boccia. And I mean, first and foremost, congratulations again to her on being named to that role. I think she's very well suited to it. She's worked very hard to get there. And I'm excited to see what the team can do under her and the other coaches' leadership. I think it's going to be really fascinating as we go into the next quadrennial and get ready for the next Paralympics in a number of years.
Yeah, it's interesting, the points of conversation that we've already had on the podcast in this episode, and because you talk about this whole idea of lived experience, and Tiffany has the lived experience. She's played parasports. She's an advocate to parasports. She's now gotten involved in coaching. I think when you speak about lived experience, you want somebody on the staff that literally has the lived experience, that can understand athletes on a different level than coaches who may not have a disability. My father, I would also put him in the same sort of realm in the lived experience in regards to understanding the way that the brain functions with different cerebral palsies, and sort of being able to give an inside understanding of what that's like. I would say that for Tiffany as well, just having the lived experience and the understanding of parasports and what it takes to get to your best peak. And I think for her, she's progressed nicely, and it's a deserved accomplishment on her part, and I wish her and the group nothing but the best moving forward. Some other news that has come out of the Boccia Canada community is their longtime therapist, Lisa, has decided to step away from the program, and I'm happy to report that I have been able to secure her for a one-on-one interview with myself and her to talk about her decision in stepping aside. So some good stuff happening with Boccia Canada, some sad as people move on, but I think that lived experience for Tiff is something that Team Canada will be able to pull on and use, and hopefully they can use it to their advantage for sure. Let's talk about something that she kind of brought out of the conversation that we had. And this is the part where, as you listen to the interview, I kind of threw my co-host off with this one because we sort of flipped the script from an interview to all of a sudden an open a discussion, which sometimes I do from time to time. And that was when we talked about this idea of rest and recovery, and particularly in parasports. Tiffany mentions that she likes the way that the organization, being Boccia Canada, handles the rest and recovery, both from a physical and mental point of view, also keeping your friendships and family as a priority, and competing on a high level. Why, for you, Josh, is rest and recovery such an important thing, particularly in the parasports world as we go up into higher and higher levels?
I think, as we discussed, it has to do with your body and your body's needs. Too often we get into situations where we like to be busy, we like to be on the go, and especially if we love our sport, we want to be out there, and we want to be training, and we want to be better, and we want to compete more, and we can end up in a cycle where we just push and push and push. And sometimes, if we're not careful, it can be too much, particularly on a body that is disabled in some way. And so I remember during the interview you talked about how the boccia season doesn't really have a definitive start and end. You'd kind of go all year round if you choose to. And so I think it eventually gets to a point where if you push yourself too far, either you're going to break down physically or just you're going to become intellectually or mentally exhausted if you're not careful. And so I think this idea that we have our season and we have our training and our competition schedules, but then we have time where we step away and we give ourselves either a physical or a mental break. I just think are very important. I think you run the risk of losing your love for the sport if you end up being pushed too hard and too far.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't think it became a physical challenge necessarily as much as it did a mental challenge. And we often talk in Boccia as it being 90% mental and 10% physical. And I believe that to be true. And I think that that's for a lot of, no, I don't want to say a lot of sports because I don't want to, criticize what other sports do. But I do think a big chunk of sports in general is what's between the ears. And in a little while, we're going to talk about a team that I think has a lot going on between the ears. And it's not always about what is skill. It's, are you mentally tough? And at some point when you're having something go all year round, essentially I'm not going to pretend that we never had breaks. Okay. That's not what I'm trying to get across here. What I'm saying is they aren't as extended as this is your definitive off season between, May, today, and October. There's not really a definitive off season because you literally go from this to that to this to that, and it really is troubling. The other part of the conversation that I really enjoyed, and I'll kick this off as for my own thoughts, is that I liked the fact that they are prioritizing relationships with family and friends and suggesting that you should carve out time to do that. I felt that unless my family was coming with me, my entire family, there were parts and times in my career where it was like, oh man, I'm missing out on things. I'm missing out on the birth of my first nephew. I'm missing out on whatever may be happening at home, but then reminding myself, you're getting to represent Canada, which some of you might say my privilege might be showing, and I don't mean it to be that way, but it can really be taxing when you just don't carve out the time for your friends and your family that really do have value to you in the long scheme of your life, and you want them to know it. But it is tough to balance your schedule and friends and family, Josh.
Absolutely. I think you hit it on the head there when you talk about you miss birthdays and you miss like I can remember with track and field, there would be times where we would have a meet on Mother's Day, and it's like, sorry, Mom, if you want to come and watch, we can do something afterwards. But then you've got my siblings who maybe don't want to come and sit in the sun for 5 hours and watch me throw things, just so that they can have their dinner with their mom. And so it becomes a challenge because you do sort of feel that sense. And I do hope your experience was a little different, considering that your parents were more involved, especially your dad. I know you told us at different points that your mom also acted as a sport assistant at times. So I would hope that made things a little easier. But certainly, as you say, you miss out on the birth of nephews and nieces, and you miss birthdays and potentially holidays with family. And I mean, even if we extend it into professional sports, like Mitch Marner's wife had their first child in the middle of the first round of the playoffs. And like, what is he supposed to do? It's his first child. You can't miss that, but then how do you get around it? So it can be very, very difficult when you get into those higher levels, because And as you point out, Team Canada won't wait. So you can't really say to them, oh, sorry, I'm not going to this high-level competition in, I don't know, Czechia, because my niece is going to be born. Like, they're going to go, oh, okay, that's nice. We'll come find you when we're ready for you again. So
yeah,
it just becomes very, very challenging.
It's not going to go over that well. No. I think for me, and you're right, and I'm glad you brought it up as a point. I think for me, it wasn't so much my relationship with my mother and father, because they were heavily involved. I think if I step back and look, I think who suffers sometimes is the people externally. So brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, because they look at it and they go, well, grandma and grandpa are gone here because uncle is competing at London 2012 and what have you. Now, my mother stayed back from London 2012 because my sister was having her first child, and that would never happen, that my mother would miss the birth of her first grandchild. But somebody did have to miss that, and it was my father and myself. I feel more sort of empathetic towards my father because, again, it's his first grandchild, but then he says, well, my kid is going to the Paralympics, I'm coaching. Like, there's all kinds of things that you just have to battle and understand that, like, the decisions you make are going to be decisions that are going to be heavily weighed on you. And that's the tough part about people who play sports. I mean, I again have a lot of empathy for people who play summer sports, because when you're off time, there's not as many gatherings in the winter because people don't want to travel from far and wide and wherever because, oh, the weather, or oh, this, or oh, that, or whatever. So the time that you're going to spend is that June, July, August, September. And that's when most of those summer sports people are really, really busy, because that's the heat of their season, and it can be a real challenge. So it's a real balance between rest and recovery and balancing relationships and all that, and it's tough. But it does go further than that, because coaches like Tiff also are going to find out the fact that they're going to have to make those same tough decisions, in that, like, I'm either going to go here or I'm going to miss this or that. So it doesn't just stop at athletes. Everyone's involved in the decision making, and the events don't sit and say, Portugal, for example, doesn't say, oh, well, we can't have this event because Team Canada has half their team at a whatever event. It doesn't work that way. Events are placed when events are. I mean, Boccia Blast, which she referenced in the interview we had, that's over Father's Day weekend, and people are going to have to make the decision of, am I going to this event? Am I doing this? Our very own technical producer, Mark Affollo, is doing the technical work, and he's having to get someone to come in and sort of assist with the back half of the event. Why? Because his kids want to celebrate their father, and that's okay. But Mark's not going to stop and say, well, I'm not going to do an event because I've got Father's Day. No, he's just going to figure it out and say, how can I make us get to point A, B, and C? And he seems to have done that. So it goes beyond the athletes and coaches, I guess, is where I'm getting at with this, Josh.
Yes, absolutely. It affects everyone in families, and officials have to be available, and coaches have to make time, and athletes have to prioritize. And sometimes you're prioritizing your regional event for a national event. Sometimes you're prioritizing an international event over a national event. It all depends on the situation and where you are in your career. So it's a very, very difficult juggling act at times.
You're time in sports is still happening. You're still doing field, but you're less so involved in hockey. What was your experience with the whole importance of rest and recovery, both on the physical and mental side of things?
For me, the balance was always between sport and work, because of course I do have a full-time job, and I have had for many years. So for me, it was a matter of finding that time, because sure, I might go and I might spend a weekend in Niagara or Ottawa or wherever it is for a para-athletics event, but then as soon as I get home, I have to change capes, if you will, and put on the work one. And so for me, it was always a matter of, what events am I going to do, and how am I going to manipulate the time away from work in order to make as many of those events happen, because I wanted to be successful and I wanted to advance in my sporting career. But at the same time, I always understood that international competition was going to be a lot harder for me to reach. And so I didn't have a lot of the same pressures that someone like my teammate Renee Fossell would have, where she's balancing work and national and international competitions around the world. So it was always important that I find the time, but the sort of regional and national levels are not quite as tightly packed as they are when you become an international athlete. So I think in some ways I was lucky, and in some ways I wish I could have progressed further, but I'm satisfied at this point in my life. I have different priorities now, and I'll continue competing for a little while longer. And I know my lovely wife is interested in seeing me do my sports, and so I may make an appearance back on the hockey rink sooner than later. But for now, I'm enjoying what I do and just trying to enjoy that. But yeah, rest and recovery did play a factor, just not as much as if I was doing the international competitions.
And there is that rest and recovery, as you bring up, from work as well, and the whole balancing of that, because oftentimes for national events, some international events too, but international events, because you travel further and you're spending more money and more time, it did sort of span over the week. So if you were taking work off, you were taking it off for the week or what have you. But I think with the work situation, you also have to balance okay, how many of these am I going to do? Because yes, I want to compete at the level that I want to compete at. But I also don't want to come back to work and be totally dead. And be useless for 3 or 4 days. And so then you're balancing, okay, is it worth me taking a personal day the day after? Is it worth me taking a vacation day? What is it worth to me doing? And I think that's the balance. And then on top of that, you have to have supportive managers and bosses who will accept what they're taking on. And that becomes, being honest at the interview. This is part of my life. This is part of my priority, and I'm going to do this. And either your boss accepts it or it doesn't, which may limit you as to how and what job you can do. And as we know in the disability community, jobs are hard to come by because of, the notions that people may or may not have regarding people with disabilities. So it really is a fine balance that does exist, and it's a difficult balance because you have to manage the disability and you have to manage the sports requirements, plus then the work requirements. There's a whole lot of things that go on between the ears and between the minds and meetings of minds and and putting together the appropriate training schedule and all those things. So it's not just easily, I'm going to go to the event and I'm going to play and I'm going to leave and I'm going to do what I need to do. There's a lot that goes into this, Josh.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, you talk about the expectations of the coaches and your employers, depending on which hat you're wearing, but you also have your own expectations, because I know for me, part of my identity has always been I'm no different than anybody else. And so for me, that means I work a full day. It means that I am involved in family. I'm involved in sports. I'm involved in my community. And eventually you have to come to terms with the fact that you are just like everybody else, but you don't have the same capacity that everybody else has. And so maybe you're not like everybody else. And that can be difficult to discuss or come to terms with as well. But I mean, that's a topic for another day, I suppose. But yeah, you have a whole bunch of expectations to balance, for sure.
Yep. We don't have a ton of time, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this. I mentioned it early in the show about a particular team having more of a challenge between the ears than on the plane service, and I'm talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, who recently played in Game 7 and, quite frankly, didn't show up. Didn't do a lot of good. They lost 6-1 to the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers, who will now go on and play the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm going to let you go because I'm going to compartmentalize my thoughts and how I want to articulate this. So I'm going to throw the ball over to you and see where you take it, and then I will continue.
What can we say? I mean, on the one hand, I think we do have to recognize that they were playing the defending Stanley Cup champions. I think we also have to recognize that they lost arguably their starting goaltender early in the series. We can debate how he was lost and whether discipline should have been brought upon the person that is reported to have injured him, but that's neither here nor there at this point. What we have to face is that here we are again with a second round exit from the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we have decisions to make. And I look at this and I just think to myself, is this a team dynamic issue? Is this a team skill issue? Or as you point out, is this a team mentality issue? And whenever we look at the performance of a team, I lean back on stats. And so I was watching sports news this morning, and credit to Sportsnet for bringing this information to me. But the core four of the Toronto Maple Leafs, which in the case of this example are Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, and Mark, have played in 6 Game 7s since 2018. In that time, Austin Matthews has 3 points. Mitch Marner has 2 points. William Nylander has 4 points. And Morgan Riley has 1 point in Game 7s since 2018. That's 6 games. They've played 6 games. They have not won a Game 7 in those 6 games. So at some point, I'm not going to say the core is rotten, because it's not. All 4 of those gentlemen are very skilled, but something is going wrong. And I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's that they all decide to take the same night off and expect that somebody else is going to pick up the load, or what the deal is. But the third and fourth lines of the Toronto Maple Leafs have been the ones that have had the bulk of the success. Is that because the best defenders are covering the first and second line? Maybe. Or do we just have something collectively on this team that they can't get it done in the playoffs? I don't know. I just know that at this point I am bitterly disappointed. And while I understand that no discipline was given to the player or players that caused Stolars to be knocked out of the series, that has to be a factor, because Joseph Woll had great moments and then he had terrible moments. I look at the first goal in Game 7 against Florida this year, the first goal scored against, and I say to myself, okay, that's a stylistic issue. Joseph Woll's style is to go down into a butterfly or whatever they want to call it now. If he stays up taller on his feet, maybe that puck hits him in the shoulder and doesn't go in the net. But that's him. That's the way he plays. So how do you tell him, no, you can't play that way? You can't. So what do? You have to play better defense. And I don't have the stats about plus minus for the core four, but I don't think it's very good. It seems like when the team gets scored on, it's when these guys are on the ice. And that's a problem, because in Game 5, and I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing the conversation here.
That's
but
okay.
In Game 5, we watched them lose 5-1 or 6-1, whatever it was. On the same night, I watched the Edmonton Oilers win their series. And in that game, Connor McDavid, arguably the best player in the NHL, started in his own end and got back to break up either a breakaway or a 2-on-1. I don't think I've seen any of this core four do that. I'm not saying that I would take McDavid over Matthews as a captain, but I think that says something that when you devote that much effort to getting back on defense as you do on offense.
Let me do this in this way. Let me tell you that we have changed captains from Tavares to Austin Matthews. That arguably didn't work in the playoffs. We've changed coaches. We've changed managers. We've changed everywhere we could change, aside from Brendan Shanahan, who now, for all intents and purposes, in my mind, is not coming back. I'd be shocked if he's coming back. If he comes back, he's done a pretty good job selling that to Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. I don't see him coming back. But we've done all changes on all levels. What we haven't done a change in is that core that Josh just spoke about. Do I think the whole core needs to be blown up? No. I think one piece needs to move from this core. Not that I'm putting it on one particular piece, but the only piece that's option to you now to move is Mitch Marner, because he's the only guy in that core four that has the ability to move on. I saw something this morning from TSN's Pierre Lebrun, who I will give credit to for this as well. He said, Marner looks like he needs a change. And I agree. I think Mitch Marner needs a change. I think that we need to really take a step back and understand that we need to recognize what is going on, because the talent is there. The talent exists. The talent, all those things. But something isn't happening properly. We had a coach who was doing things with this team we've never seen done in a long time. He pushed them as far as they've gone in a long time. They had not been to a Game 7 since like 2004, 6, something like that, in the second round. He did that. But what happened in that Game 7 was they looked like they didn't care anymore. They looked like they didn't want to be there at times. The fans were booing them off the ice, which that should never, ever, 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 ever happen. at your home rink. You should never be booed off the ice in your final game at the stadium. Never, never, never. What we saw in Game 5 and Game 7 when they were outscored 12-2 on their home ice is unacceptable. You came out gangbusters in this series. You took a lead 2-0. Okay, Florida came back. They won both their games in Florida, as they should on paper. Then we laid an egg in Game 5. Then we played almost a perfect game in Game 6. Everything went well. Everything happened. And then Game 7, we just laid an egg. And Steve Dangle, who runs a podcast network, was interviewed on CBC News Network. And Steve said, the only time I ever get called by CBC News Network is when the Leafs lose. And I don't know what to say anymore. Every fan knew after Game 6 this was going to be the result. They had the worst differential in playoff history of 6-1 in a game on home ice. Like that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be there. So something has to give on this team. This is no longer a funny joke. There has to be something fundamentally changed. The only people that I would say are safe in management is Craig Berube. That's it. This is year one of a 4-year deal. He's not going anywhere. Everybody else in management, hold your breath, because there's going to be a management personnel gone and there's going to be a player or two gone, because something has to give. We cannot continue to beat our head against a wall here as we're doing, and you cannot afford to have your fans booing you off the ice and throwing jerseys on the ice. I did see a comment this week which made me laugh. Somebody said, oh, what an expensive temper tantrum that you threw a jersey on the ice. Do I condone throwing jerseys on the ice? Pop, beer, whatever it was? No, I don't. But I understand the frustration, Josh. I get it. And that's where I'm at. I'm frustrated, but I'm not going to sit here and say to you, oh, well, if Stolarz didn't get injured, it would have been different. If the penalties didn't go one way or I'm not there. I don't want to be there. I heard that narrative this morning from somebody I know and respect very well, that it was one-sided, but I don't want to go there. I don't want to say this team didn't perform well in Game 7 or Game 5, and that's it. That's where it ends.
Yeah, absolutely. This year we had better goaltending. We went out and we upgraded the defense. We got in Brendan Carlo and Chris Tanev specifically for the playoffs. And it didn't change anything, unfortunately. I don't know what the answer is. I do tend to agree with you when you say that Mitch Marner needs a change. I think he might be in a similar situation, although for different reasons, to Nazem Kadri. Nazem Kadri was born in London. He played for the Knights. He got drafted by the Maple Leafs. He played for the Maple Leafs. But I would argue that he has flourished since he left. Now, I think he was ridden out of town, personally, because of his lack of discipline in the playoffs. But the fact remains, he went to all his various stops. He's now in Calgary. But he played on a Colorado team that I believe won a Stanley Cup. Maybe not. Let me rethink that. I don't know if they won the Stanley Cup or not with him. But certainly he had more playoff success with Colorado than he had. And I just think getting away where he could be a little more anonymous helped him. And I wonder if the same will happen to Mitch Marner. I'm at a point with this team where if they blow it up and say a Mitch Marner goes to Florida or Boston or wherever he ends up and he wins the Stanley Cup, you know what? Congratulations. Good for you. But this team, as it's constructed, is not working.
It's not. And look, you've said it on this program many times. You have to be careful of what you wished for because players are going to go and have success in other places. And that's the reality in which we're facing with Mitch Marner. He may walk away for absolutely nothing because he is allowed to do that. They tried to trade him at the trade deadline. Mitch Marner vetoed that trade and said, I want to stay. I don't think that's going to be lost on Mitch Marner that the organization tried to trade it. Do I understand why the organization tried to trade him? Yeah, I do.
But understand as well that the fans have every right to be upset with you when you don't perform in the playoffs and you vetoed a trade that could have potentially made them better. We've all seen what Rantanen has done with Dallas. Yeah. So if he is in fact who Marner was going to be traded for, then you have to be prepared for that, Mr. Marner, because people are going to be upset about that. It's the same as the argument we used to have about Matt Sundin back in the day. Well, he's old and he's this and he's that and he's not performing and he needs to waive his no trade so that we can be better. Well, no, he negotiated that in good faith, but he also has to wear it when he doesn't perform the way he's expected to perform, and the team suffers as a result.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
There's one other thing about Marner I do want to touch on briefly, and maybe you heard this, maybe you didn't. But in an interview after the game, after Game 7, I heard him say, "You can't have any passengers in Game 7." I'm sorry, what? What did you do in Game 7, sir, that you're calling out your teammates and saying there can be no passengers? I hope you're including yourself in that, because people in glass houses should not throw stones.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of passengers, but I would say he was the passenger A in that series. And again, I think you're right in saying that, you know, the Florida Panthers are the defending Stanley Cup champions. No kidding. They're probably going to do it again. Like, they're probably going to get there, hopefully against Edmonton. And that's just the reality of where we are. Brad Marchand, total Leaf killer. Like, just for whatever reason, when that guy sees the Leafs, and I respect wholeheartedly, I don't know if you saw this in postgame, but he said, this year was the year that I was afraid of the Toronto Maple Leafs because they had more talent and more structure than I'd ever seen before. And so he knew it. He knew it was there. But what I'm tired of, Josh, and I know we're going way over time here and we're almost done. What I'm tired of is the little tantrums we're seeing from Marner, like the one we saw in Game 7, where he looks at the bench and he says, "Wake the bleep up." And I look at that in the moment and I'm thinking, okay, I understand the fact that you're riling up your team. I get it. But you need to wake up. You need to not be the passenger. And I want to be 100% clear. I am not putting this at the feet of Mitch Marner. I'm not. I'm putting this a whole team. But if you're going to yell at your bench and you're going to tell them, wake up, or last year you're going to have a tantrum, then maybe I do agree with Pierre LeBrun, who says it's time for a change and you need to be better. But we also, as a fan base, need to wear the fact that he may go and have another career year somewhere else and may have the potential of winning a Stanley Cup. You know, point final. Look at Phil Kessel. Everybody thought Phil Kessel was going to be the end-all, be-all for Toronto. And guess what he did? He walked down the Stanley Cup with the Penguins down Bay Street, full of hot dogs. Not really, but that was the idea. He walked down Bay Street full of hot dogs and said, "I won the cup." He went to Sick Kids, brought it around there. I respect it, but you have to understand that this is the risk you run when you give no trade. And as an organization, a player's not always going to say, "Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, trade me for somebody better, and good luck to you." Yeah, that's going to be tough for them too. Quick thoughts for you in regards to Edmonton, Dallas. What are your thoughts?
Edmonton, Dallas is the one series I still care about. I don't know how much I'll watch of this round, to be honest. And depending on who's in the Stanley Cup final, I don't know how much of that I'll watch because my Leafs are out of it now. I will follow it. I'll watch highlights, but I don't know if I'll invest the time in the games. For Dallas and Edmonton, I think on paper we would say Dallas should be the better team, but Edmonton has surprised people before. So I think it's going to go 7 games. And because I'm a diehard wish that Canada brings us, a Canadian team brings a Stanley Cup home, I'm going to choose Edmonton, but I think it's a toss-up.
It's a toss-up, and I think it's going to be a barn burner of a series, and it's one that I'm going to record the nights that they play because it's going to be 8 o'clock, and I don't know that I want to invest the time watching the games, but I am going to record them, and I'm going to tell you that the one edge that I would give Edmonton is the fact that they just beat Dallas last year in this exact position. But then the other side of the coin would be, if you're Dallas, you're coming with a vengeance, and you're saying, yeah, we wanna right the ship here. So this is gonna be a heck of a series, and Stuart Skinner has to be on his game. None of this, we pull you for Calvin Pickard. You either have to be there or you're gonna get run out of the building, because your team is talented in Edmonton, but so is Dallas, and that's going to be the reality. I think this thing goes 7 games, and I really hope it's Edmonton for the same reasons you point out. I want to see a Stanley Cup brought to Canada. But yeah, it's going to be very fascinating. And just for me quickly, I think Florida gets it done fairly easily against the Carolina Hurricanes. Could be wrong. I just think Florida has that scar tissue that you understand. They understand what it's like to win in these big games. We saw it in Game 7 against the Leafs. They understand how to do this. They understand. They've been there. They've done that. They've got the calluses to prove it. They're going to be back in the Stanley Cup final, and they're going to be a serious contender. Quick thoughts from you there. You said you agreed, but I don't know if you've got anything else you might want to add.
I think that experience trumps everything else, and Florida has experience in spades. There are talented players in Carolina, but I just don't think they have enough to get past Florida. Florida is built for the playoffs. They're built to win another Stanley Cup.
Yeah. And they've got a coach who really breathes success and has breathed it right from the time that they won the Stanley Cup last year. And I love Paul Maurice as much as I wanted to punch him in the teeth. When I heard, kill their defense so they have nothing left in Game 7, well, that's exactly what they did. They killed us in every aspect, and he coached them the right way, and I think he's going to do the same against Carolina. God love James Reimer, but I don't know. When you think of the confidence that Bobrovsky has built over this 7-game series, look out, they're coming again for the Stanley Cup. And that's just the reality. Next week, I promise to carve out some time for the Toronto Blue Jays because we haven't really had a chance to discuss them. Things are just what they are for the Toronto Blue Jays right now. Thank God the American League as a whole is suffering, so we're not that far behind. But the things have got to get together. But we'll discuss it more at length next week. That is the end of our program, and we appreciate you staying with us for a little bit of extra time this week. We'll be back next week. Until then, be safe, be well.